And while they were talking about the next war, it was a foregone conclusion we're going to another war. And it wasn't like it was going to be 50 years from now. It was like, this is going to happen very soon in our lifetimes. And that was just assumed. And it wasn't like, well, we just do this because that's what we do at a, at a military college. We talk about, no, it was, this is going to happen for these reasons. And we were talking about different types of conflicts. And the two major areas that came up were, would it start as a result of a conflict in Europe, or would it start as a result in the Middle East? And some other areas were talked about, but these are the two prominent ones. And I haven't ever talked about this because it's hard for me to talk about saying that happened to me in 2014 and people to say, yeah, everybody always talks about that. Hey guys, we got a new special deal for you. That's right, exclusive volume pricing. For those of you that order more than just a couple of products, we're bringing you the best deals that we can find from any of our suppliers, and that is on common gold and silver coins that you guys have told us that you value the most. Right now, we have got deals on Canadian gold maple leafs, gold philharmonics, American gold buffaloes. On the silver side, Canadian silver maple leafs and American silver eagles. All you have to do is click on the link. It'll take you to our website's exclusive volume pricing page, where we change the prices every single day, update those prices every day on these volume deals specifically to get you the lowest price on precious metals that we can possibly bring you. And I'll let you know that a lot of these deals we're making very little or no money, but we're bringing to you at volume discount so that you can get access to these. Right now, we've got sales on the Canadian gold maple leafs, the gold philharmonics, the American gold buffaloes, Canadian silver maple leafs, and American silver eagle. We will also be adding the American gold eagle as well as other products as we scour for the best deals. Simply click on the link on the form, fill out your information. I will give you a call and determine what you're wanting. We'll get this out to you as soon as possible. We're going to change prices every single day. So you got to check the website every day at www.goldsilverpros.com/exclusive-volume-pricing, or just click on the link for exclusive volume pricing right there on the front page. New prices every day, discounts on the most popular coins in gold and silver exclusively from goldsilverpros.com.
Welcome to Gold Silver Pros.
Everybody, this is Rob Kientz with goldsilverpros.com. Today's presentation, I'm going to be talking about market volatility and what's going on as a result of the increase in conflict around the world. Be sharing a very personal story about my experience leading up to this that I got from college, which I've written a blog about. For those of you who haven't read on www.goldsilverpros.com blog, I had a really interesting experience in my master's degree where I went to military college. I'll share that. But I wanted to talk a little bit about what's going on and the increasing risk that I see in the world and the increasing uncertainty and where I think it's going to be going. Actually, I think this is something that we should be talking about going forward, because the world has just become a very insecure and unstable sort of place, not only abroad, but I think even increasingly more so at home. And there are a lot of things that are going to make us a lot more uncomfortable. And I don't mean just economically or politically, I mean as well our culture and what we're likely to see in our own neighborhoods. And I'm going to start talking a little bit more about that on our channel because I think it's time to do so. Got the glasses on today because I've got a lot of exhibits that I want to share with you guys in terms of maps and things like that to kind of help us talk through the discussion. But before I get to that, I just want to give you an update on the news. So the first story I'm going to report on: Hamas leader calls for global Muslim uprising and day of rage on Friday, report says. A screenshot of a video on X or Twitter shows Khaled Marshall, former leader and founding member of Hamas, who allegedly called up Muslims earlier this week to unleash a day of rage on Friday. The four things that it asked for is to show anger, especially next Friday in Muslim countries and also among Muslim diaspora around the world. He called it the Friday of Al-Aqsa flood. And he said this will send a message of rage to Zionists and to America. He asked for financial help from all Muslims around the world to help with their money. He called it financial jihad. He asked Muslims to give to the fighters of Gaza in order to compensate them for their destruction. The third thing, he asked for political pressure from Muslim leaders and Muslim nations to stop Israel's military invasion of Gaza or the Gaza Strip. The most important thing, he asked all Muslims around the world to carry jihad by their souls, to fight and be martyrs for Al-Aqsa. He wanted Muslims to fight against the Jews, starting with Muslims who live in the countries surrounding Israel, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt. And we're going to talk about how the tensions and the fighting is escalating beyond the Gaza Strip and beyond Israel into other parts of the world, including Syria. And further, He urged to go to the borders and try to enter, each by his own means. He said this is a time for jihad to be applied on the ground rather than just in theory. He asked the mujahideen to go in long caravans to spill their blood on the land of Palestine. I think that's a misprint on the quote. The final words of Mashal's speech included, "Funds are important, but today we're asking for your blood and souls to be sacrificed for Palestine." So that is interesting from the Hamas side. I have another story that says Netanyahu vows every Hamas operative will die as Israeli citizenry mobilizes for war. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, according to the Citizen Free Press on X, every Hamas operative will die. Hamas is ISIS. Benny Gantz spoke of total societal mobilization on Wednesday night. Benny Gantz is working with Netanyahu to establish basically an emergency form of government in Israel. Benny Gantz, here's the quote. Benny Gantz, who joined an emergency government with Netanyahu, stated on Wednesday that his cooperation with the government is a clear message to our adversaries and to all Israel citizens. All of us together are mobilizing. Gantz said after the Security Cabinet meeting in which he participated, just as people from left and right, from the city and village go out to fight, decisions of the government will also be made by people from different camps. Now we are all one camp, the camp of the people of Israel. These Israeli leaders don't seem too concerned about the immense and rapidly mounting civilian casualties among Palestinians. A lot of stuff going on. U.S. National Security Council Coordinator John Kirby confirmed the United States will be sending the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower aircraft carrier to Eastern Mediterranean after it's already announced that the USS Gerald Ford will be deployed to support operations for the Israel-Gaza conflict. Now, you can see things are really heating up. The rhetoric from both sides is, we're fully committed to this. We're going in no matter what. Netanyahu has basically stated they're going to wipe out Hamas. And I'll get into, when we get into some of the exhibits, I'll talk about what it looks like. In fact, we'll do that now. Yeah, as I'm reading through the stories, I want to show you guys some maps and things. If you're not completely up to date on the area and sort of a little bit of the history. So this is the Gaza Strip right here on the I guess southwestern or western side of Israel. It's where a lot of Palestinians live. It was a contested area between Hamas and the PLO back in the early 2000s. I think it was 2007 that Hamas stood up to the Palestinian Libertarian Organization, I believe the PLO, and took control. And it's been an area of contestation between Israel and Hamas that have held it. Here's a little bit more detail on a map from Al Jazeera, a source originally, I think, from the UN, on what the outlook of Gaza looks like in terms of population. You can see in yellow the urban camps, in gray the refugee camps, and a couple of key border crossings. On the north, it's the Erez crossing. On the south, it's the Rafah crossing and the Kerem Shalom goods crossing. Now, it's been reported that Egypt is trying to get humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip through the Rafah crossing, but Israel doesn't want to allow it. Israel said that they're going to turn off the power. People are basically begging in the hospitals in Gaza Strip for power to be brought in. They're only hours away. So by the time you see this report, they may actually be out of fuel to run their generators in hospitals in the Gaza Strip. And the hospitals are saying, if you don't let us bring in fuel, all of the people that are injured are going to die. It's going to become a morgue instead of a hospital. And so that Rafah crossing is being contested by Israel. I don't know if anything's getting in the north on the Erez crossing or through the Kerem Shalom. I haven't seen reports on that, but I know the Rafah one that Egypt is trying to get goods in is being contested by Israel, and they're running out of all supplies. They're running out of fuel, and the hospitals, if they run out of fuel, according to people in the Gaza Strip, will turn into morgues. I also want to talk a little bit about the population here. Gaza has a very young population. A lot of the people that are being killed are very young. You can see the distribution is more along millennial and Gen Zers than it is Gen X or baby boomer, what we would call Gen X or baby boomer here in the United States. The biggest part of the population is really the age groups from 0 to about mid-20s, and then it declines a little bit until you get in the mid-30s, and then 40s and above, it's very low. See, there's a very young people that live in Gaza's population, and a lot of the ones that are considered now to be the Hamas fighters may have been the ones that are the brothers of girls that died during the original conflict back in about 2009, where Israel and Hamas had another conflict as well. So it's interesting to me that a lot of what goes on in terms of conflict in the hotbeds of the world also coincides with things like recessions and economic opportunity. You looked at the Gaza Strip, a lot of young people, not a lot of economic opportunity across the world right now in general, and that tends to sometimes lead to more conflict and more hostilities. Economics has a lot to do with this, as well as religious beliefs and other things like that. Going on to more stories. Israel says no exception to the Gaza siege unless hostages freed. This is a report from Reuters by Henriette Jakar, 𝘭𝙁𝙊𝙍𝙇𝙄𝙊𝙀, and 𝘎𝑚𝑒𝑟A on October 12, 2023, 8:55 a.m. So this is new news. A quote here from Reuters. Israel said on Thursday there would be no humanitarian exceptions to its siege on the Gaza Strip until all of its hostages were freed, after the Red Cross pleaded for fuel to be allowed in to prevent overwhelmed hospitals from turning into morgues. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, arriving in Tel Aviv on a trip to show solidarity, told Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that America would always be by Israel's side. Israel has vowed to annihilate the Hamas movement that rules Gaza Strip in retribution for the deadliest attack on civilians in Israeli history, when hundreds of gunmen crossed the barrier and rampaged through towns on Saturday. Public broadcaster Khan said that Israeli death toll had risen to more than 1,300. Most were civilians gunned down in their homes, on the streets, or at a dance party, which I reported on my blog, if you read my blog at www.𝑔oldsilverpros.com. Scores of Israeli and foreign hostages were taken back to Gaza. Israel says it has identified 97 of them. Israel has responded so far, according to Reuters, by putting Gaza home to 2.3 million people, most of which are young people, as I showed you in the graphic, under total siege, and launching by far the most powerful bombing campaign in the 75-year history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, destroying whole neighborhoods. Gaza authorities said more than 1,400 Palestinians have been killed and more than 6,000 have been wounded. The International Committee of the Red Cross said fuel-powering emergency generators or hospitals in Gaza could run out within hours. According to ICRC Regional Director Fabrizio Carboni, quote, without electricity, hospitals risk turning into morgues. The human misery caused by this escalation is abhorrent, and I implore the sides to reduce the suffering of civilians. Israeli Energy Minister Israel Katz said there would be no exception to the siege without freedom for Israeli hostages. Quote, humanitarian aid to Gaza, no electrical switch will be lifted, according to Katz. No water hydrant will be opened and no fuel truck will enter until the Israeli hostages are returned home. Humanitarian for humanitarian. And nobody should preach us morals, Katz posted on social media platform X. Egypt, which has a single border crossing with Gaza, said is trying to allow aid in there, but it's not getting in. And again, talking about what's going on there, this is becoming a bigger conflict as two airports in Syria have been bombed. Damascus and another one on the north side. A ambassador from Iran was on its way to the area, and apparently the flight had to be diverted as those two airports were bombed. Apparently there are some military airports and the smaller airports still open in Syria. The reason that that's important is because Iran is thought to have been, according to the news, a supporter of Hamas. And so it looks like diplomatic channels have completely been turned away. That's the significance of that event. Like they're physically and kinetically bombing airports so that the diplomatic solutions or the diplomatic talks between Hamas or the support of Hamas, Iran, or Israel are not going to occur. And it's a blood war right now, very clearly. No diplomatic solutions. It's bombing. People are dying on both sides, and it's really escalating. And the U.S., for their part, has said that they will stand by no matter what. And there are now two aircraft carriers in the area. The original Gerald Ford, along with its supporting or strike group of other ships, went out there to directly aid. We're told that the Eisenhower is there for support purposes, but honestly, that's two aircraft carriers to cover an area the size of Gaza Strip, which is smaller than London. So America is putting an immense amount of resources into this conflict that honestly, if you've got aircraft carriers, that to me says airstrikes. And if your airstrikes in an area of 2.3 million people and a size smaller than London, a lot of people are going to die. So the death toll by the time this is all said and done looks like it's absolutely going to explode. and you're bringing in potentially surrounding neighbor Syria into this, Iran into this. My understanding from people who have been in that region, and I'm no expert on this region from a geopolitical standpoint or cultural standpoint, but people that I've talked to have said that the borders between nations are not as strong as the cultural borders, because the saying goes, if sand's blowing, one way or another, the borders are always moving. The borders that exist in the Middle East are a construct that may not be as strong as the internal belief systems and culture. Think about the United States and the state borders. State borders are there for legal purposes, and yes, we all have different subcultures in each state. But honestly, if somebody's going to attack America on its soil, or Mexico or Canada, probably you would see all Americans sort of rush aid regardless of what state they're in. And that's sort of similar or analogous to what's going on in the Middle East. That doesn't mean all Middle Eastern nations are on the same side. There aren't differences in opinions and in politics and culture, but once this situation has erupted the way that it has, it appears to me that entire region eventually is going to be brought into it. So this is going to, I think, it's going to spread and become a much bigger conflict. Now, I wanted to kind of switch gears and move over to Russia and Ukraine, because the reporting on that sort of died down in light of what's been going on in the Middle East, but also it's just died down in general, as it seems as though there might be some flagging support potentially for the Ukraine war in terms of political rhetoric, even though money's still going over there. And I wanted to talk about bring you some maps of that and kind of talk about what I'm seeing on that side of the world as well. So we'll go ahead and bring up those maps and kind of narrate those for you as we go along. This is a map that basically shows the current conflict and who owns what. In the pink, I guess here, Russian military control, and the sort of red striped areas, mostly along the upper north portion of this map, are the contested areas with limited Russian military control. Of course, you can see that Crimea was annexed in 2014, and that's neighboring or to the south of the Ukraine conflict, and it borders Russia and Ukraine. And of course, Crimea is important because of the Sea of Azov, ports and things like that, shipping lanes, and it's a natural border between Ukraine and Russia. So that's that map. If we go to another map, this it shows us who controls what. It talks about some of the areas under contestation. If you look at the eastern part near Donetsk and Luhansk, those are Russian control for a while. If you look at some of the rest of the map, the non-striped areas around Kupiansk, Severodonetsk, and sorry, I'm butchering these names, and the southern areas, those are now under Russian control. And of course, Crimea is highlighted here as having been under Russian control. And you can see that it's not the majority of Ukraine, but it's the area of Ukraine that may have had more Russian speakers before, a little bit more Russian culture, and areas that Russia has stated that they believe belong to them anyway. And those are the ones that Russia is sort of holding right now. It does appear that the offensive has not continued to move west in any shape or form, although here is an interactive map that shows some of the recent reported strikes, missile strikes, bombings. Here's a drone strike right here in the middle of the map that looks like a little anchor with a couple of emitting signals from it. That's a drone, and there was a drone down. There have been some drones down to the south. There have been some missile strikes down south. There have been some mobile artillery. You can see in the blue the little truck down in the south. On the eastern side, of course, we've had some bombs. We've had some missile strikes, explosions up here, and things like that. So this map is interesting if you're looking at essentially the types of area that are being contested recently. And I just want to read to you some of the information that we're getting on that side. I have an article here, according to Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Germany's new $1.1 billion arms package for Ukraine is to help it get through the winter. So Germany has stepped up as a major contributor to aid packages. Germany on Tuesday announced via Channel News Asia a $1.1 billion weapons package for Ukraine that Berlin said was to help Kiev get through the winter. The package includes a U.S.-made Patriot air defense system, 2 German-made Iris-T air defense systems, 10 more German Leopard tanks, and other types of equipment. Quote from German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius: "With this new winter package, we are further enhancing the readiness of the Ukraine armed forces in the coming months. The story goes on to note the provision of such a large armed package demonstrates that NATO is preparing to support the conflict for another year. In Washington, the White House and hawks in Congress are considering authorizing a giant Ukraine aid package to get through the 2024 election timeframe or cycle. After initially being reluctant to go all in on the proxy war, Germany has become one of Ukraine's top NATO backers, second only to the United States. According to German-based Kiel Institute, Berlin has provided Ukraine with about $18 billion in military aid, compared with only about $44.5 billion provided by the U.S. The story goes on to note, in the early days of the conflict, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said he was opposed to providing Ukraine with tanks and warplanes because he was trying to avoid World War III and nuclear war. According to an article in Politico dated April 22nd, 2022, Olaf Scholz cites risk of nuclear war and refusal to send tanks to Ukraine. So originally, Germany didn't want to get involved, although they are now. Shows how interestingly they've been dragged into this. Quote, according to the article of Politico, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, this is back in April, defended his widely criticized refusal to send heavy weapons to Ukraine, citing the danger of nuclear war. Quote, I said very early on that we must do everything possible to avoid a direct military confrontation between NATO and highly armed superpower like Russia, a nuclear power, Scholz told German weekly Der Spiegel in an interview published Friday, adding that he would continue to strive to prevent an escalation that would lead to a third world war. Again, this is back in April. There must be no nuclear war, he said. Asked what made him sure that sending German tanks to Ukraine would trigger a catastrophic reaction from Russian President Vladimir Putin, Scholz argued that there is no textbook for this situation where you can read at what point we're perceived as being belligerent. Interesting. So let's apply this to both wars. The U.S. has been supplying aid to Ukraine for a long time. 44 billion, I think, was the number, according to the Kiel Institute. And then if you look at what's going on with Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip, the U.S. is sending 2 aircraft carriers. So the U.S. is involved. My question is, in history, will history see the U.S. as being sides of these wars early on? Will they, in other words, are these proxy wars, or is the U.S. directly involved because of the aid and because of the military support? That's an interesting quote from Scholz about at what point do you be seen even as just supporting the war as a proxy? Are you risked as being seen as part of the belligerents or part of the sides of the war, if you will? Another quote. That's why I'm not squinting at poll numbers or letting myself be irritated by shrill calls, the chancellor added, in obvious reference to the growing criticism of his stance at home and abroad. The consequences of a mistake would be dramatic. So in other words, earlier this year, Germany wasn't supporting it, but now they're the second largest supporter of Ukraine. A story off of Medium from Charles Buke. Only 15 years of peace in the history of the United States of America. I find this kind of surprising, but not kind of surprising. According to this story, and here's a quote from the story written by Charles Buke, published in Traveling Through History. Quote, in the entire history of the United States of America, there's been a grand total of 15 years where we've not been at war with someone. Big wars, small wars, wars waged on the open seas and small rivers, across sandy hills, through dense trees, and high in the sky. The United States is engaged in the all. From its founding in 1776, the United States was engaged in war for its survival against Great Britain until peace was finally reached in 1783. Unbeknownst to many, this wasn't the end of war for the fledgling United States. No, that wouldn't come for more than a decade. Also beginning in 1776 were the Cherokee American Wars, also known as the Chickamauga Wars, which were a series of back and forth conflicts between American settlers moving to the Old Southwest and the Cherokee tribes calling this land home. Until the end of 1795, this violence would rage, what is now Tennessee, as well as the colonies and eventually states of Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Kentucky. Justifiably concerned that they would lose still more land to the expanding white settlers, the Cherokee struggled long and hard against the fledgling United States, only to eventually sue for peace and give up much of the land that they'd so long fought for. There would be 2 peaceful years in 1796 and 1797. Before the United States could get more than a breath, the quasi-war with France would break out in 1798. The quasi-war between the United States and France was an undeclared war, but all the more violent for it. Waged primarily across the high seas, it broke out following the fall of the French monarchy, when the United States refused to continue to pay back the debt it had accrued during the Revolutionary War. Combined with the outrage over the Jay Treaty and the United States' engagement with Great Britain in trade, despite French engagement and war with them, it comes as little surprise that the new leaders of France authorized privateers to conduct attacks on American shipping, up to and including the outright seizures of merchant ships. It would not be until 1800 until that war essentially came to an end. So as you can see here, and it goes on to talk about in the story that war has been a part of America for all but 15 years since basically our founding. And now we're engaged in more. And I'm not going to make a pro or a con statement as to whether we should be in these wars, more of a statement that we're continually in them, we're continually drawn into them, and it affects a lot of things at home. And I think now I'm going to tie this a little bit more to the market side of things. It's going to start taking a toll on the markets. And there are two main observations I'm going to have for you here. And then I'm going to tell you a very personal story about something that happened to me in 2014 that really affected me and how I've reacted to basically the conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East. So the two things were essentially that the United States being involved in war at times can help the economy. You certainly saw that helping the economy to rebuild after World War II, and the World War II kind of saved us from the Great Depression. But there's a tie between the economic issues and conflict. Economic issues seem to precede worldwide conflict. What have we been saying about the worldwide economy for the last, since the Great Recession? We haven't recovered. What do I show you all the time? The labor force participation rate, the CPI, the inflation, the hollowing out of the middle class, the inability of the middle class to keep up, the lack of quality jobs, the wages haven't kept up with inflation, the destruction in the overall values of real estate stocks and bonds when decremented for inflation. The fact that gold really, since 2000, is the only thing that's held up in the long term in terms of real value when compared to inflation, CPI. And the second part of that is that the wars themselves cause their own sort of destruction. They cause a destruction of culture. They cause a destruction of the togetherness of society. They're very destructive towards the ability of people to get along. And I think that what's going to happen, before I get into economics, I think what's going to happen is our society itself is going to be fractured. I think that people are going to line up along different lines and have different thoughts, and that's okay. But I think that we're headed into an era in America of increased social discord. And I think we saw it a few years ago with riots. Of course, we saw what happened with the pandemic and the closures and our inability of our economy ever to recover and the massive money printing that followed after. But I think we're also going to see that people in the United States are going to start fighting each other more. And I'm not taking sides one way or the other. It's just an observation there. So I want to take a look at the stock charts here for just a moment and kind of show you what's been going on since this conflict in the Middle East started. So this is basically a 5 or 6 day chart. And you can see the stock market's got the Dow Jones in blue, the NASDAQ in sort of peach, and in purple, the S&P. And you can see it, they've risen. The S&P's risen the most. Of course, there's going to be a lot of money spent on these wars within certain areas, the economy, defense contractors, rare earths, certain types of technology that are going to cause those sectors to increase. And that's where you're seeing these markets increase. But we've also noticed a slight downtick. Let's see if I can jump out a month. We're starting to see some of this start downticking lately, because I think what's happening is, even though there's increased spending going on in the economy, it's also going to roil market, the uncertainty of the markets. It's going to cause, I think, a lot of volatility going forward in the stock market. And I wanted to take a look at bonds, and not only the U.S. bonds, but across the world. You can see that the bond complex is up today quite a bit, and it's been going up since the conflict began. The 2-year has been sitting above 5%. The 10-year is risen to 4.662, but the yield curve is widened. That's the difference between the 2 and the 10-year, which indicates an oncoming recession, by the way. But also that's been widening, indicating, and that recessionary fears are increasing. The Treasury and the Fed have been engaging in a sort of yield curve control that are bringing the 2 and 10-year back together after about 5 to 6 months of widening. And it had been working until this conflict began, and now that's widening again. Again, more predictive. If you look at the UK, their bond rates are up as well. You see green across the board on all but their shortest term rates. If you go to Germany, bond rates are also rising there. And what this indicates is increased insecurity among the world of what's going to happen. People want more to invest in bonds, and bonds are a good indicator. Here's Italy right here. They're all up. France. Bonds are a good indicator of risk in the system. Bonds are like a a canary in the coal mine for oncoming risk. You can see that in France, we've had rates rise today as well. Let's look over at Japan. As you look at the Japanese bonds, they're rising as well, falling a little bit today, but when I was looking at this earlier today, they were up. Japan, of course, has its own economic problems. Look at Australia and see what's going on in Australia. Rates are rising. What's going on in Canada? Now, not all of this is because of the conflicts, the Ukraine conflict, and in Brazil, of course, we're going to see what's happening, and also the Middle East conflict. What, in addition, is happening is that the economic uncertainty was increasing beforehand. So the question is, did the economic uncertainty, as I alluded to before, lead to these conflicts? Or are these conflicts simply going to increase economic uncertainty? I think both are certainly true. Of course, you've seen what's happened in the last 7 days to gold and silver as the conflict has increased. They've gone up. The crypto complex has come down, by the way. Just want to point that out. Bitcoin is down. We'll go to the crypto complex here on CNBC and just get a general chart. This is just an easy general chart. It's why I use it. I know there are better measures for the crypto complex, like different ETFs or baskets of them. But you can see that Bitcoin's coming down, Litecoin's coming down, Ethereum is coming down, XRP is even down a bit. What other ones do we have here? And we see some of the exchanges and some of the others. The crypto complex has come down. In terms of currency pairs in America, we've seen some positive change, like compared to like the Canadian, the Mexican, but you also see some fade in some of these other pairs as well. What's happening to Asian currencies when compared with other? The U.S. has gone up to Japanese. The Australia has gone down to the U.S. New Zealand has gone down to the U.S. So we see a little bit about what's happening there. There are changes in all of these markets, and here's what I think is going to happen. I think the stock and bond markets are going to come under tremendous pressure. I think cryptocurrency eventually will go up, but right now it's sort of being hammered. But I think it will go up dependent upon how the U.S. government, the SEC and things treat it, and how some of those cases going on, are going to affect the viability of cryptocurrencies as a true financial asset here in the U.S. versus how much regulation they'll get. But I do think that as more economic panic happens, people are going to move back into Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. But you're seeing that gold is up immediately on the news. Now, I do think that we can have a fade in gold, because when we get to recession, the gold prices, from watching this channel, are determined largely by derivatives rate paper trading. There'll be a sell-off. So you could see gold come back down to the set. And given the state of where we're going to war, you could see it come down to 1650, 1700 and a massive paper sell-off. But I think once we get into deep recession, which I think is going to happen this year, in real terms, I think we're already in it when you discount everything for inflation. We're negative on all of our numbers, including GDP. But aside of that, the official declaration for a recession will, from most economists, will probably come next year, probably somewhere between the first and second quarter, or early in the second quarter, because they're going to want to see a couple of quarters of negative data. We're starting to really see it now, but they wait 5 to 6 months before it's obvious, before they call it, okay? Because they're always looking at data in arrears, so looking at data back. But as we look at the data having decelerated and inflation having accelerated, it accelerated, fell back a little bit, and it came back up. This is the second wave, and the second wave will be stronger than the first. I think officially in the second wave will get above double digit on the official government inflation. And I think on the unofficial, like if you go to shadow stats, I think that you're going to see inflation hit near 20%. And that real inflation, when measured equally, dating back all the way to the 80s, I think you're going to see really high real inflation, and the government inflation will pass double digits at that point during the next inflationary trend, which will stretch in probably at least to the middle of next year. And then we'll see what will happen. It may go to third quarter, and then we'll see how much the war drums are beating. There could be a pop in the stock markets if we end up going to war, or just end up supporting these wars through proxy. Some of our technology and military indexes could go up. Even staple goods could go up. A lot of those get used in support of the war, especially in humanitarian aid, but inflation is going to continue to eat at it. But I think that we're going to have increased volatility. At the end of the day, we're going to have so much volatility in the markets that if you're sitting there holding a portfolio of diversified assets, and I'm not your financial advisor, we'll put that disclaimer up on the screen, but if you're holding a portfolio of different assets, you may want to start looking at that now, because volatility can kill returns. It can kill valuations. It can kill the returns that you have now that you've had in your portfolio the last 10 to 12 years since the last Great Recession. So you may want to think about potentially consolidating into more safer assets. Of course, I'm always going to advocate gold and silver because I've been doing that for 15 years, not just because I own a shop, but I'm a big gold silver guy. But you can see the way assets were reacting early on to the war that gold and silver are doing probably better than anything else. Okay, that's market discussion. Now moving on to my personal story. So those of you that may not know, I have a master's degree in what I call cybersecurity. It's actually called information assurance, and I got that from Norwich University. Norwich University was founded in 1819 by a former West Point grad and a colonel, I believe in the Army, and it was founded in Vermont in 1819 as a military and science academy, and it allows in civilians as a private military academy. It's the oldest senior private military academy in the United States. And I took the cybersecurity program there because at the time I graduated in 2014, it was ranked independently by an independent polling and analysis as the second-rated cybersecurity program in the U.S. And I wanted to go to the best. And I knew as a military college it'd be very rigorous, and it was. And I was in cybersecurity at the time, and we had a lot of government contracts for the company I was working for, and so it made sense for me to understand and get all of that education in cybersecurity, but also on government-focused areas as well. So that's why I chose that program. Anyway, so I graduated in 2014, August 2014, I believe. It was an online program, but we had a week of residency at the college. So I went to the college, and at the college you had to defend a thesis. It was oral defense where you would get asked questions and confirming knowledge with our professors and our other students, because it was a cohort program. We were all professionals, including the professors who were working full-time. And so I did that. And then during the week, the colleges also presented, different lectures. And it wasn't really a formal class. It was like a 2 to 3 hour lecture on a specific area of study. And it was all the colleges. Norwich is known for not only computer science, but nursing and also military studies and other things. Well, I decided to do the military college one because it was a military college. I thought this is going to be a free, quick education on military history at one of the preeminent military colleges in the United States. I might as well take it, So I went to a lot of the military presentations throughout the week, and one that ended the week, it was at Whitechapel, and we were getting into the chapel. A lot of people there. There was an ambassador from Europe, and I don't remember all the names and specifics. I'm going to just talk generally, but there's an ambassador there from Europe, and Condoleezza Rice, by the way, gave our graduation speech. She was National Security Advisor and Secretary of State. She had moved on, I think, to teach at Stanford at that point in time. She gave her graduation speech. She wasn't part of this. But I mean, Norwich has a lot of pull, and I just say that to say, Norwich is well respected in the military and government community. So we had an ambassador with some of the higher ups from the college there, and they were talking about sort of state of the union in the United States, and they were talking about the next global conflict. And that may seem normal because I'm at a military college, but again, I was a civilian, and I didn't have access to a lot of this information. I wasn't privy to it. And so what I was getting there was really absorbing some of this study and the conversation around military history, but this was more of a current events discussion. They were discussing what would lead up to the next war. And well, the first thing that struck me is the tone was very somber as soon as I got in. You could tell that this was a continuation of a discussion the panelists have been having privately and around campus the week. You just felt that way, and you felt when we went in, it was an extremely serious discussion. And while they were talking about the next war, it was a foregone conclusion we're going to another war. And it wasn't like it was going to be 50 years from now. It was like, this is going to happen very soon in our lifetimes. And that was just assumed. And it wasn't like, well, we just do this because that's what we do at a military college. We talk about, no, it was, this is going to happen for these reasons. And we were talking about different types of conflicts. And the two major areas that came up were, would it start as a result of a conflict in Europe, or would it start as a result in the Middle East? And some other areas were talked about, but these are the two prominent ones. And I haven't ever talked about this because it's hard for me to talk about saying that happened to me in 2014 and people to say, yeah, everybody always talks about that. But it was very prescient because we had this discussion, and it was a serious discussion. They were talking about serious, specific events and things that could lead to war in a very short time frame. Like not only within our lifetime, but I got the feeling that this was like a within 10 years discussion. And this is in 2014. How prescient was that in 2013, 2022 and 2023, that we've had these conflicts emerge in two traditional hotspots, Eastern Europe. There has been between Russia and Ukraine, and also between Israel and Hamas, and that conflict, which is, really dates back. If you want to talk about the conflict between Jews and Palestinians or Arab nations, that's been going on for a very, very long time. And those are two traditional sort of hotspot regions of the world that tend to have conflict. And those are the ones that we talked about in 2014, and fast forward to 2023. And those are the ones that are erupting. And it's happening almost as though was being discussed in this panel discussion. And it was like deja vu when the Russian invasion of Ukraine happened. And then when this stuff kicked up in the Gaza Strip, I thought, oh my God, it's exactly like we discussed almost 10 years ago. And it just shocked me. It shocked me back then when we had the discussion. And it shocked me now looking back on that discussion, in that it was so predictable. It was so easy to see for people that have been following it for so long. But to actually see it occur has just been frightening in a lot of ways. And go read my blog. I've got probably a better write-up on this than what I'm explaining on video on 𝑘𝙊𝙬𝙊𝙍𝑝ros.com. But it was just kind of shocking that in 2023 and 2022, this stuff is happening. I'm like, oh my God, what we had discussed in 2014 at the college was true. And it scared the crap out of me back in 2014. I had already been studying economics and stuff, and you study politics and war along with that. But to see this come to fruition, and not only that, but my dad fought World War II, and a lot of the buildup to what happened in World War I and World War II looks a lot like, it's like a rhyming verse of a poem. It looks a lot like what's happening now. It's not exactly like, but it's very similar. The way that the conflict manifests, the way that economics has played such a big part because of all the economic conflict we've had since the Great Recession. The Great Recession highlighted the fragility of the system, and it caused divisions such that Russia and China and the BRICS started forming their own trade networks, and United States, Japan, Australia, and the Blue Dot, and you saw the world fracturing along economic lines, and you've seen the increased rhetoric politically occur since then as well. And it's basically that decade of economic, almost decade and a half of economic uncertainty around the world, and now the massive inflation going on around the world, the lack of economic opportunity, and now all of a sudden we're having these political and cultural conflicts. It's not exactly the same as what happened at the beginning of last century, but it's very similar. And I just find it interesting that we're back to this playbook of economic crisis and war. And the last thing I'll say about that is, and as I wrote in my blog, the next 10 years are going to be unlike anything any of us have ever lived through, unless you have parents that are still alive from the Great War. Mine aren't, they're both past. It's going to be hard for this generation to understand. And right now, if this doesn't wake you up to do some preparation, I'm not talking about just gold and silver. I'm talking about food, family, pay off debts, spiritual readiness, ability to defend yourself. And I'm not telling anybody to do anything violent, but take some martial arts, or, buy a self-defense weapon, take a self-defense class, in defense, to defend yourself. Not saying anybody go out and do anything rash. Do not, under any circumstances, do anything rash. Keep it calm, okay? And just prepare yourself. And unfortunately, I think what's going to happen is there's going to be more conflict within the United States because of economics and because all the stuff that's come out culturally in the last 10 years. I would hope, the last thing I'll say is, I would hope that we as Americans can come together and work together across racial, religious, cultural boundaries, because we're going to need to, because we're about to go through really tough times. And we don't need to be fighting each other, whether that be physically or just arguing with each other. I've seen violence and anger escalate in the United States. I showed you videos about a month ago of riots in California malls among kids, and I think that's because they lack economic opportunity and they're fighting each other. Of course, we saw riots, on the West Coast, a lot of those. I'm seeing at ball games and sporting events, people get pissed and start attacking each other. Physically attack each other. And there just seems to be an underlying current of anger in America. And I'm pleading with people, please work together. Please keep lines of dialogue open. As we get further into the war cycle and the economic collapse cycle, which I think we're headed to, it's going to be very hard for us to survive as our current state of nation if we don't work together. But individually, you still have to prepare financially as well as spiritually in every other way. That's just my message to you guys. Just a message I wanted to deliver of hopefully peace and eventual prosperity after all of the discord and chaos I think that we're about to go through. Just take care of yourselves, take care of your neighbors, love one each other as much as humanly possible, but know that what we're about to go through is something that you've never seen before. We're going to go through a lot of war. I don't know if this can be World War III. Both Trump and Ramaswamy, presidential candidates, were in social media talking about World War III, so I'm not the only one talking about it. It's become public discourse politically in the United States. Some very high ups are talking about it. We saw, the German Prime Minister talking about it and not wanting to get in World War III, not wanting to get involved in Russia-Ukraine. So World War III has been on everybody's minds. And it certainly was a discussion at the college in 2014 at Norwich when I graduated. And so people that study this stuff for a living know what the potential is for war erupting everywhere. So if we get to that point, we need to remain strong at home. That's the only way we're going to survive. So let's not divide and conquer ourselves now. Let's love each other and try to support each other as much as possible, because what we're about to go through together collectively is going to be very ugly and nasty. And I have a feeling that we're past the point of no return. We've crossed that Rubicon, so to speak. And it's going to happen. I don't know exactly how or how bad it's going to get, but I know these things are happening. And I don't, looking at the rhetoric of all the players that are currently involved in war right now, nobody's stopping. Nobody's saying there's any diplomatic solutions. And this is going to bring in other players. And as other players get brought in, it's going to widen divides. It's going to continue to segment different parts of the world along political and trade boundaries. And it's going to lead to more conflict. And we're not even talking about potential hotbeds such as North Korea. We're not talking about China and Taiwan just yet. Those could be additional areas of concern. We're not talking about Brazil and South America and all the stuff that goes on there. There's a lot more that could continue to go on. And given all of the forced immigration, there could be conflict within communities. I'm talking forced immigration around the world, open borders around the world. In Europe and in the US, a lot of traditional Western nations is going to cause opportunity for a lot of internal conflict. And I'm just saying, avoid it, please. Avoid that internal conflict, because we're going to have a lot of external conflict, and it's really going to affect us in a lot of ways. I don't care how you prepared or how much money you think you have. It's going to affect everybody. And we need to stay strong on the inside and not fight each other. That's really my message. But just prepare, because I think it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better, a lot worse. And we'll continue to cover that on the channel as things progress. I know I normally talk about economics, and I normally don't get into this stuff, but it's time to start talking about it because of my experience and my studies, and because I think we're going to go through it no matter what. And politics, religion, culture, economics are all integrated with one another. We can't just talk about the economics of it. We have to talk about all of it. And the only way for us to understand what's going on and to respond in the most positive way possible, and the most collectively strong ways we stand together, amongst all of our differences in the United States, being a melting pot, is we have to understand, and we have to be reasonable and not allow our emotions and our passions, to take us over. So that's my message. But just be prepared for what's coming. I think it's going to be really sort of nasty going forward. All right, that's going to do it for today, guys. This has been Rob Kientz, your host with 𝑔oldsilverpros.com.
Hey, thanks for watching. We selected these videos just for you. Check them out. And remember, $4.99 a month keeps the lights on and the channel going. So join our Gold Silver Pro supporter membership. We appreciate your support. Keep stacking.